Hey guys, it's Matt. Today, I'm going to be walking you through the Combat Academy to help you achieve a Legend ranking and as a result, make you a pro of the new combat system. Hope you all enjoy. Session 1. Introduction to Combat. In the first session, Lady Deathnell teaches the novice player how to simply attack an opponent and how to eat food to survive. These are the basic essential components to the Runescape combat system. To attack an opponent, simply click on the opponent you wish to fight, in the same way you normally would. If your life points are getting low, click the food and your life points will be restored. You guys should have no problem getting Legend ranked in this chapter, as its purpose is to get you acquainted with the mechanics of the Academy. If you have any issues with this chapter or any others, of course, Lady Deathnell is there to help you. Simply follow the flashing arrows and icons for guidance. Okay, so let's move on to Session 2. Combat Styles. There are 3 combat styles: Melee, Mage, and Range. In this session, Lady Deathnell informs you of the benefits of each attack style, and then tests you of your knowledge. To get the weapons for each combat style, simply click the associated statues inside the Academy. To equip the various weapons, simply click on them, and then proceed to attack the dummy. After learning each style individually, Lady Deathnell will take you on a refresher course. You will be able to freely switch your weapons to the combat task in front of you to successfully complete this session. Fortunately, there are no constraints between switching between weapons and armor despite being in combat. Okay, so let's move on to Session 3, the Combat Triangle. Let's make an analogy. Have you ever played rock, paper, scissors? Well, essentially the Combat Triangle is just that. Lady Deathnell essentially teaches you how to play rock, paper, scissors. Melee attacks are effective against ranged armor, however not magic armor. Ranged attacks are effective against magic armor, however not melee armor. And magic attacks are effective against melee armor, however not ranged armor. So, to put it into basic terms, melee beats ranged beats magic, and magic beats melee. Although this is a good rule of thumb, each combat style is not limited to what they can do. You can beat the triangle essentially by switching to a different combat style in what we like to call hybriding. With the addition of dual wielding, the players should have all the tools they need to successfully conquer the triangle. Okay, so that brings us to Session 4, Targeting, Enemy Weakness, and Damage Types. All monsters have weaknesses. Depending on the monster, each is susceptible to various attack styles, and of course, the various damage types. It's our job as players to exploit these enemy weaknesses. By hovering over a particular weapon, you can see the weapon style and its bonuses. Weapon styles are not confined to just weapons themselves, but also to bolts, arrows, and magic spells. But how would you know what your enemy's weakness is? That's where targeting comes in. As I am demonstrating on screen, hit the select target button just above your chat box, and then proceed to target your opponent. From there, either click or hit F5 to access the combat pane. Your opponent's weakness will be located in an icon box in the upper right hand corner. From there, you can adjust accordingly with your various attack styles and damage types. Let's move on to Session 5. Using the ability bar and basic abilities. The ability bar is where the new innovation of RuneScape comes into play. The ability bar can be used to place both combat and non-combat abilities onto it. As demonstrating here at the Combat Academy, I am taking food from the table and dragging the food onto the ability bar. By doing so, you are creating a shortcut. Instead of having to click your food, you can now alternatively use a key binding instead. For the purposes of the Academy, drag your food into the first slot of the ability bar. By doing so, you can now use the 1 button to eat your food. The player is given access to 5 separate ability bars, which can be accessed by hitting Shift plus the number of the ability bar, or using the arrows to the right of the bar. For instance, if you want to access your second ability bar, simply hit Shift 2. Having multiple action bars will be highly effective in a hybriding environment, whether it be in combat or skilling. Let's go over basic abilities. To access any of your combat-related abilities, simply click the spellbook or hit F4. Once there, simply hover over an ability to see its type. As you can see, I have dragged the basic ability, Slice, onto the action bar. But what are basic abilities? Basic abilities are used to build adrenaline, and they are your most used abilities. They are also your weakest abilities. Adrenaline is built up as a result of using basic abilities so that you are given access to more effective abilities, which will be highly damaging to your opponent. To explain this further, let's move on to Session 6, Adrenaline, Threshold Abilities, and Ultimate Abilities. I've gone ahead and dragged some more abilities onto my ability bar. For the purposes of the Academy, if you are still a novice, I'd hold off until Lady Deathknell tells you what to do. So, what is adrenaline and how does it factor into your abilities? As stated previously, adrenaline is built up by using basic abilities. Threshold abilities are abilities that require 50% adrenaline. If you are unsure of the requirements of a particular ability, then simply access your magic book and hover over the ability in question. Most abilities have weapon requirements, level requirements, adrenaline requirements, and situational requirements. Once a new ability is unlocked or comes off cooldown, it will flash, letting you know that it's available for use. When using a threshold ability, you will use up some adrenaline. This is perfectly within the realm of the game mechanics, as it provokes the player to go back to their basic abilities to rebuild adrenaline. We'll talk more about rotations later on in this guide, but let's move on to ultimate abilities. Ultimate abilities require 100% adrenaline, and when activated, use up 100% of your adrenaline bar. They are the most powerful abilities in the game, and are often used to try and KO your opponent. After using one of these abilities, you will have to go back and rebuild more adrenaline, or use other in-game tactics such as drinking adrenaline potions. Now that we know all about our abilities, let's move on to the final session of the Academy, ability effects. Well, the best was saved for last. Ability effects are generated from the abilities that players can use to counter or inhibit their opponents. They are dragged onto the ability bar from your spellbook, just like any other ability, and they are found in pretty much every section of that spellbook, so there are plenty to choose from. But what do these abilities actually do? Well, let's take an example. For instance, if a player uses an ability with a stun effect, and then their opponent counters that effect with an ability called Freedom, the player is released from the stun. Both of these effects are considered ability effects because, well, they affect the player directly. Other ability effects generated as a result of using combat abilities include bleeds, poisons, and multi-target attacks. These effects can either put a dot or damage over time effect onto the opponent, inflicting repeated damage, or the effect could hit multiple targets. The most exciting and engaging ability categorized in this way is an ability called Momentum. Momentum can be used to double the damage done by your auto attack for 20 minutes. By activating Momentum, the effect is essentially the same combat system that we were all used to in the beginning. Momentum takes the stress off the novice player who is still learning the other abilities. Once you feel comfortable with a particular rotation, then the weaning process can begin. However, Momentum can be highly effective in a PvP environment, as using auto attacks can still put a great deal of pressure onto your opponent. That's all for the sessions. Let's move on briefly to talk about ability rotations. Okay, so if you've never used any rotation before, it's best to test out a default one from the Combat Academy. You can pick up an ability bar rotation by clicking on the associated combat statues. If you already have abilities on your current action bar, then the default bar will override that, so simply just change to a different action bar if you want to keep your old action bar. For the purposes of this guide, I will be going over the default melee ability bar and what I feel is a good rotation to get you on track. Here we go. Okay, so the default rotation is highly effective to players looking to do an amazing amount of damage onto their opponent. So your rotation is going to want to start with basic abilities such as Slice, Punish, Sever, Dismember, 1, 3, 4, and 5 by default onto your action bar. As soon as you get 50% adrenaline, you're going to want to use your Slaughter ability, which is by default put at 6, to get a bleed or a dot onto your opponent. And then you're going to want to go back to your basic abilities. The reason why you put a bleed up onto your target is to put as much pressure onto your opponent. Remember that you want to aid and combo abilities together to really put that pressure onto your opponent. If you want to put even more pressure onto your opponent, you're going to want to chain a stun on top of the bleed and all the other damage. So that's where your second move, Backhand, comes in. When you stun your opponent, remember that other basic abilities, such as Punish, become more effective. Punish does a considerably higher amount of damage when your opponent is stunned. So when you stun your opponent, you're going to want to use Punish. Again, remember that Slice actually makes all of your other moves have a higher chance to crit or do more damage too. So, as a rule of thumb, you can make any rotation you like. However, it's best to combo a healthy balance of everything. Keep your bleeds up and take advantage of the threshold abilities and ultimate abilities. Remember that you can freely switch up armor and your action bars within combat to counter the triangle, essentially hybriding. Honestly, the best way you can learn is by practicing. I really enjoyed making this guide for you today. I really hope it helped. Have a good one, guys, and peace out.